Okay, ready in 3, 2. Welcoming back to the podcast is the illustrious Michael Osborne discussing his upcoming title, Time Slips. Now, today on the show we have a outside contributor, which we don't usually have, which is Frater Steve Watley from the SRIA, an esteemed colleague of mine. So today we're going to be chatting about our experiences of time with anecdotes and editions by Michael Osborne. So to start off, Michael, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michael Osborne. By day, I'm a solicitor working in the grand area of probate and estate administrations. But by night time, I write, and I write around Rosicrucian subject matters for the most part.
Yes, thank you, Brother Earnshaw. If you could quickly introduce yourself.
Quickly. Well, I've been a Mason now 45 years. I'm based in Tokyo, Japan. I don't have a full-time job, but I keep body and spirit together somehow. I'm probably a full-time Masonic author. I'm just completing a spiritual workbook for lodges that want to experiment, and that's about it, really.
Fantastic.
Past Grand Historian, etc., 33rd, etc.
Good stuff, good stuff. Thank you. Frater Watley, if you could briefly introduce yourself. It's rather rude to say quickly. Over to you.
Hello everybody, Steve Watley. During the day, I used to be an avionics technician. Now for my sins, I'm a health and safety manager, which is absolutely wonderful, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I like it because I am a little bit weird, but there we go. At night and every sort of weekend, I run the Bright Weird YouTube channel. So maybe 70 or 80 videos or stuff that we've got on there now that I've written. I've got like maybe another 100 or so lectures that I've written that I've got as papers, but I haven't got around to filming them yet because there aren't enough hours in the day. I also obviously do a bit of Freemasonry, past master of Trevornance Lodge in St Agnes in Cornwall, and I'm also Rosicrucian SRIA 7th grade. So looking forward to today. The subject we're going to be talking about, time slips, is something that I've thought about for many years, so I'm really looking forward to see what everyone's got to say about it all.
Yes.
Back to you, Matt.
Thank you. So, time, that mysterious dimension. It's possible to point to X, Y, and Z with fingers, with things, with instruments, but time is the immeasurable one, the one that seems to be beyond comprehension for the average person. It's a bit of a mystery. The first deities in early religion seem to be that of time, as we have Zervan in the Persian tradition. We have Saturn and Kronos in the Greco-Roman system, and also we have the marriage of Kronos and Rhea. So it's a bit of a mystery. It's a little bit inaccessible. And also we have the golden era of Saturn in the Greek myths. So hoping to elucidate on such a mysterious dimension, we pass over to Michael Osborne. Over to you.
Thank you. It's quite interesting, actually. I mean, down the years, like many of us, I've contemplated the phenomena of time and how sometimes we read of these experiences that sort of, if you like, break through the veil of its linear trajectory from past to present and on into the future and things like that. But then so much of this is an overlap, actually, with other ideas and interests and knowledge, I suppose. And I was intrigued, and I've always been intrigued by this concept of what I call haunted time. The sense that it's not just a time slip per se that people may or may not experience. It may or may not be a clinical experience. It could be phenomenological, but the idea that perhaps we come into contact with minds that existed in the past and perhaps also exist in the future, because time does not act in this linear way in reality. So what I wanted to do, and what I tried to do, and it's a very short book. It's about 100 pages or so. So it's not a long read. I tried to draw on 3 examples. And they're examples that resonate with me, and they resonated for me. Some of them from my childhood. One of them was the legend of Lucy Lightfoot, which took place on the Isle of Wight in rural Hampshire, as it then was. And this was a story that appeared in the Unexplained magazine of the early 1980s. If any of you are familiar with the good old Unexplained magazine, it was wonderful. And it turns out that the story was actually fabricated. It was made up by the vicar that wrote it because he was trying to earn a few quid for a church restoration. He'd done it previously, not quite as colourfully, but he'd written other things in the past for a previous pamphlet. So people lost interest in this story, this legend of Lucy Lightfoot, because they discovered that it wasn't in fact true. There was no actual Lucy Lightfoot that sort of slipped into the Crusades, which is what the story is telling us. The problem is, of course, that they throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it ignores the influences on the man that wrote the story. And many of them actually draw from local folklore, and they have a certain truth and a certain resonance. And they also draw from his life experiences. So when I started to dig deep and research him a little more, I discovered that in fact he was a survivor of a large gas explosion in Bristol in the 1950s and had been a first responder. And so when this story talks about an exploding lode crystal that sort of rips this young Victorian girl out of the 19th century, out of the modern era, and transports her back to the 14th century, he's actually drawing from his own experiences of some of the most horrific injuries, because he was a first responder. It happened literally along the same street that he lived, and about 13 or 14 people died, many of them children. So there's an element of him writing in the sense of, as we all do, to sort of release some of that sort of experience, and not always positive but sometimes negative experience, in order to try and convey something you want other people to understand and put down on paper. But also when he blends in other local, mostly Hampshire and specifically Isle of Wight traditions about riderless horses and ghostly apparitions and things of that nature, it begins to make a lot more sense. So there's a truth in it. Okay. And a couple of the other examples, one thing that's fascinated me about some of these experiences, whether it's observations of ghosts or spirits or demons and angels, or if it's a time slip phenomena, is when actually there's more than one witness to that event. So it brings on a certain plausibility, and you can kind of sort of then discount this idea of the tiger in the woods, or that somehow experiencing ghosts or having deja vu experiences has got something to do with the hunter-gatherer instinct as we evolved for our protection. This idea that fear is there to actually protect us from danger. Well, in the Jourdain Moberly incident, this is two very highly educated late Victorian ladies who were, one was the principal, another lecturer at an Oxford University college, for instance, very well connected with local society in a sort of highbrow sort of Oxford way. They both jointly experienced what they later initially described as a haunting, but later as a time slip event, where they not only saw apparitions of people from the 18th century in the gardens of Versailles when they weren't expecting them, but they also interacted with them. So it was mind on mind. Okay, so some of these characters, not all, but many of them were having conversations and directing them and things like this. And all of whom didn't actually exist. They weren't there. in our time stream at least. So there's two people experiencing this independently of one another, who are we would describe as good quality witnesses. They were in fact embarrassed by what happened, and for many years didn't talk or publish about it. And it was only later that it came about. Now, the whole term time slip actually originates from these two writing their book, which is called An Adventure. And it's about this Mobley Jourdain. It's quite well known, this time slip event. And true or not, they were describing and identifying structures and buildings that had long since disappeared in the Palace of Versailles, which has, yes, it does. It has a lot of had a lot of farm buildings and things of that nature in there, and they no longer exist. And they described them. They did describe them pretty well. And some bloke has written, I forget his name, he's written a sort of reconstruction of their walk through the grounds and has come to the conclusion that there's something in the story. Okay. And the final one was something that was local to me, so it captured my imagination around the time that I was reading the Unexplained magazine. So I was about 8, 9, 10, that kind of thing. And a very elderly lady, Victorian lady, in a neighbouring village, described the visit of William Hogarth to the village in the 18th century, and the haunting experiences he encountered. And it was only later that I recognised in some of those experiences that are described by her what we might call time slip phenomena. Okay, so it's a blend. It's this idea of haunted time, ghostly nuns, sure, walking through doors, but it was the fact that it actually, the victims, if you like, for some of this phenomena, actually stepped into rooms and things that existed in the past, and descriptions of buildings that had existed in a prior time. Okay, to the ones they were at. So I committed that story from memory to writing, and it appears in the book. So that's the idea. And essentially, where I'm coming from is the idea that time slips aren't hallucinations necessarily in a clinical sense. I talk about that a little bit. There are, of course, hallucinations, but it's when one or more people experience the same thing that there's some validity to it. And also the quality of the witnesses is very important too. So they're often shared, or if they're fictional, like the legend of Lucy Lightfoot, they're influenced by mythology, and I think that's an important part of it. This idea of a common unconsciousness, or the what Jung would describe as the collective unconscious, and they reflect a certain perception that time can be distorted, but that it's actually a sort of contact with other people's consciousness across times. And the way I like to think of it, and the way I have described it, we're on video, but of course for the purposes of radio broadcast, I'm drawing a straight line, and I've got the beginning and the end written on it, and I'm putting us in the middle of that diagram, and that's linear time. So
it's a little bit blurred.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps it's because I have the blur. Anyway, so here's the point. There's the beginning. There's the end. You get the idea. Man in the middle, but it's linear time, so it's very sort of two-dimensional in that sense. But we know time doesn't exist that way. We know gravity influences it, for instance, and that photons of light are impacted and influenced by gravity. We know that dark matter is a form of gravity, or it's influenced by gravity, and it makes up something like 25% of matter, but no one understands what it is. But anyway, so I've actually rolled this paper into a circle, which is more this sort of Einsteinian concept of time, because it's influenced by gravity. And if I put my pen through the middle where this character is, this little man in the middle, what you actually end up with are 3 points. You have a point at the beginning, and the middle, and the end. What I'm suggesting is that the minds that are alive and existing at those particular points actually can communicate with one another. That somehow the consciousness even if it exists within the physical brain, the physical mind, actually can experience another person living in a different time frame, as if they are actually alive, and that could explain so-called intelligent hauntings, poltergeist activity, and all sorts of a whole raft and manner of supernatural phenomena.
Yes.
Okay, so the idea that of the perception of time being distorted, well, it's all connected in some way or another with an altered state of consciousness, and possibly also with spiritual stress as well. That's essentially what the book is about uncovering, and it's rather limited 100 pages, so it's quite punchy, and I don't dwell awfully long on all of these points, but I do raise them more, I suppose, as a sort of menu for further research for people that read it. So there you go. That's the summary.
Interesting. I'm sure that later on Francis Watley will have something to say about dark matter and also particles and the experience of time. But it seems to be that if mind is a substance that's related to the dimension of time, then the experience is only separated by position. If we say that time is just a difference in position in respect to a certain dimension, that's one analysis of time. And if we are the same consciousness, then time is irrelevant. If we have the same unit of consciousness, whether it's a electron or some kind of particle, if you want to go down the deterministic route, then time and space is absolutely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So you could access mind at all points without defining the units of consciousness, the particle of consciousness. Then anything's open for interpretation. But for the uninitiated and people that missed the previous podcast, could you please explain briefly the story of Lucy Lightfoot?
Sure. So the legend of Lucy Lightfoot runs essentially along these lines. A young Victorian girl, I think she's 17 in the story, the farmer's daughter, a good horsewoman, falls in love essentially with the chivalric ideal of a knight whose effigy, wooden effigy, which is quite rare, exists in Gatcombe Church on the Isle of Wight. And this love is very intense, and she's described as returning to the church when it's closed, because back in those days, of course, and until comparatively recently, they used to be open for people. And she used to go along and tether a horse up outside, and was often seen tethering a horse up, going inside and spending time with the effigy of this knight, Edward Esther, who existed. The effigy is in the church, although its origins may be more complex perhaps than the story assumes. Anyway, there's a storm that hits the Isle of Wight, and you're in Cornwall, you'll be familiar with the sort of coastal storms.
Oh yeah.
But in the story, and some of them are quite brutal as well, there's sort of remnants of cyclones, and this is a description of one. And in fact, a cyclone, a remnant of a cyclone, hit the Isle of Wight, I think not once but twice, a few years before the arrival of the Reverend Evans. This is the bloke that wrote the story in the 1960s. So the memory of these storms in which people died, which lashed the island, were quite vivid. And he describes in the story essentially a cyclone that coincides with a solar eclipse when the sun goes dark. The title, in fact, of the unexplained story was when the sun goes dark. And during this period, this great energy, it explodes a crystal in the knight's sword and propels Lucy Lightfoot away. She vanishes. And people discover a horse, and it's just assumed she's run away or been murdered or something horrible like that. And people forget about her over time. Well, the story goes that a vicar about 100 years ago, so this story is set in the 1820s, so in the sort of early 1900s, somebody, a vicar at the church, discovers a tract written by a minister from the Isle of Scilly, actually, the Reverend Trelawney, which describes the adventures of Edward Esther, or he gets mentioned as part of St. Peter's Crusade. England didn't take part, but individual knights did. This is the final crusade. And in the story, the name Lucy Lightfoot appears as Edward's wife. Okay, girl from England, Lucy Lightfoot. So the vicar that reads this is like, well, hang on a minute, there's this girl that disappeared 50 odd 80 years ago or whatever. Same bloke, same girl. She was obsessed with this guy. There must have been a rip in time that took her back. Well, he wrote this story. I think it was sold it for a shilling or 5 new pence. And the local newspaper got hold of it. And once they got hold of it, the Unexplained magazine published it. And once that happened, there's been a TV documentary in the past and a sort of TV film and things of that nature. So it's had its influence. But then, of course, the truth came out. And Evans, I think he died around 1990 from memory. At some point before he died, sort of fessed up to writing the story. And in fairness to him, he was Welsh as well, from South Wales, influenced by very rich mythology and imagination. Had these experiences I described at the Bristol Road explosion, married a local girl from the Isle of Wight who brought in all these different ghost stories and other myths on the island, and he blended them together into this fictional story, which tells you a lot about him. It tells you a lot about the area and the culture around which these sorts of stories arise, really. And I was interested in that because there's, like I say, there's a grain of truth in it. There's a psychological truth, which is that the imagination plays a key role in our perceptions of these stories. And it's not to be downplayed in any way, because there are, and I'll go on to talk about, so-called verified time slip phenomena. There's the Bold Street Liverpool 1996 experience, and they've actually tracked down at least one of the people who experienced that. There was 2. And
one was the shop, is it, where they went into the shop?
Yeah. You know, she's been on TV. She's very plausible. She's telling the truth. I don't know what happened, but you know. So this is the street scene in the 1940s. She stepped back into, or possibly 50s, with somebody else. And there've been other ones. There's the Dieppe time slip phenomena, where 2 ladies go to France on holiday in the late 50s and hear the sounds of fighting. They don't see anything, they hear the sounds of fighting in the streets, guns and machine guns and things of that nature. Well, there was a raid at Dieppe that went very badly wrong for Canadian forces in the Second World War. So there's a lot of spiritual stress connected to that. Most of us in England will be familiar with the Battle of Edge Hill or Kyneton, where a royal commission was even sent by the king in the 1640s to investigate actual sightings of fighting going on in the skies above the battlefield, not just the sounds but visual things. And these people were even reporting people that were still alive taking part in these in the action that was unfolding. And even today in Yorkshire, the Battle of Towton, and indeed other battlefields also from the later Civil War, like Marston Moor, there's sounds of fighting and sometimes visual experiences that are described. And another one in America is around Sharpsburg, where the Confederates had a narrow victory against Federal forces, and a lot of Federal soldiers were actually killed at a very narrow passing called Antietam Bridge, or Antietam Bridge, however you pronounce it. And there are to this day people that will tell you that they hear and sometimes have visuals of these scenes, of this stress that was taking place. So there's something that connects these things. And then, as I say, the Moberly Jourdain incident, where 2 academics are actually explaining and describing pretty much the same thing.
We on a slightly different note, we have a long-standing sitcom in the UK called Goodnight Sweetheart with Nicholas Lyndhurst, who plays Rodney in Only Fools and Horses, where he slip time and go back to the World War II era, where he's got a separate life when he walks down a particular street.
We all love these stories because they tap into this imagination that we all share. I'll give you an anecdote, actually. My cousin, he was an apprentice electrician in the early 1970s when this happened. So this isn't a published story, it's just one within my family. And on Fridays, he was given the job of collecting in bets and running up half a block to the bookies on the street, and the others would have fried egg sandwiches, whatever they're doing, and their mug of tea. And they gave him the job because he was like a 16-year-old apprentice. That was what they did. So they'd listen to the transistor radio, read the paper, listen to the race on the radio, place their bets based on what the newspaper was suggesting was riding, and the race ran at 2 o'clock, say. Okay. Well, on one Friday, they gave him the job of running up with the bets in hand and their money, and he felt this sort of sense of thickening of the atmosphere, this sort of gooey heaviness that sometimes we have. He didn't think a lot of it, but he did feel slightly sick and queasy, which is a common symptom, actually, sometimes of time slip phenomena. He enters the bookies, and the race has already run, and the results are written on the chalkboard, because it was written on a chalkboard back then. And the name of the horse, because the guy he saw just finishing off the name of the horse slip, and the chalk mark went down a little bit. So he didn't place the bets, and he thought he was late. It's strange, And he goes back to the fellas in the Greasy Spoon, who say, "What are you talking about? Place the bets. We're listening to the radio. It hasn't run yet. Is this 2 o'clock? No. Go back." But one bloke said to him, "What did you say the name of the horse was that ran the race?" And he gave the name. He said, "Put 10 quid on it for me." And that was a lot of money back in the early 70s. Well, he did. And of course, when he walks into the bookies, there's nothing on the chalkboard, nothing at all. It'd already been written off, whatever. But then he hears them placing last calls for the bet, the race runs, and then they write the results down on the chalkboard together with the little mark as the man slips on the ladder. And I guess his workmate was very happy with that result. But that's an example. These things are sort of replicated up and down the land in every country and culture across the world. And what are they? The answer probably lies on a quantum level in some way or other, in how our consciousness truly operates, and the fact that time isn't as linear as we think. It's influenced by many things, perhaps even our thoughts.
I had a strange experience. It's funny you should say that people having a physical experience seem to experience time slowing down. I had an experience which started me on my spiritual journey. We talked about it in the last podcast. I'd been meditating upon what time is, how we experience time, and I was also reading a lot of the Corpus Hermeticum. So I was pondering quite deeply about the nature of time and consciousness and human experience. And I was walking home from a friend's house, and it was like I was having a walking meditation. I remember it was quite dark. I was walking down Dorchester Road from my friend's house, and between lampposts, I had this epiphanizing realization of what time is and what consciousness is and how it's experienced and how it's bound into the human body. And it felt like I rose up out of my body, outside of my crown, particularly in an angle where I was behind myself and looking down from about 10 to 12 feet. And I realized what time was, how we experience it, and then that we're all inside of a gigantic mind. It was just like the Poimandres or the Poimandras from the Corpus Hermeticum. And it felt like I'd been granted a vision, or I'd been plugged into something, some kind of, I'd been granted gnosis to see things how they truly are.
I did a short, This is it. So things like OBEs, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, altered states of consciousness through psychedelics and things of that nature. I dedicate a short chapter actually to just this in the book, where I describe how the CIA and the US Army, US Air Force, and also the Russian GRU, previously the KGB, actually invested quite a significant amount of money from 1972 onwards investigating this phenomena, because they thought it was a technology they could use to remotely view or observe enemy infrastructure. And there was some success, so it's claimed, in that regard. And we spoke previously, Chris mentioned he'd gone off to the Hemisync workshops in Virginia, where Robert Monroe was based. And Monroe himself, Robert Monroe, died around 1995, I think, was heavily involved in assisting the CIA with developing a technology that might actually replicate out-of-body experiences like you've had. That doesn't involve necessarily things like LSD, for example, or other psychedelic stimulants. And it's said that people do experience out-of-body experiences and things of that like. And this all ties in with our experience of time, because psychedelics, they do influence, they do distort the perception of time. You could be gone for many months or years, and it's only matters of minutes in our perception of time.
I did have one of these experiences when I was at university. It was no psychedelics, no alcohol, nothing at all. I was completely sober, and I went to sleep at a very strange time in the evening. It was about 7:30 at night, and I started off in a lucid dream, and I was moving through the landscape, but it was incredibly vivid, this dream was. I started off in Oxford, and then time wound backwards as I was walking through the town centre, and I started to, as I realised I was dreaming, I was able to levitate, and whilst keeping asleep, so the body was frozen, probably to do with the sleep hormones that had been kicked out, and I was floating down the high street. And then time wound back as I was doing that, and everybody changed their clothing. I ended up in Girona in Spain, and also around Venice. And it was like I was having another life, having another job, going and doing things and doing regular things. And I'd say in this experience, I was probably gone for about 3 months, something like this. And when I woke up, only 30 minutes had gone. And the experience of time was vast. It was absolutely enormous, and it was so vivid. I can remember nearly everything from it, like I'd lived a parallel life for 3 months in some kind of far off distant land. It was most bizarre.
I mean, Monroe describes exactly the same things in his book, and he talks about how actually in his case he was even sort of living the life of somebody else for several years.
I'm sure Brother Earnshaw has something to contribute on this, but Brother Earnshaw has written about it in one of his books, The Royal Arch, which is worth a read.
I think I missed the timing, but I wanted to introduce the experience of somebody called Whitley Strieber. Are you familiar? He's an American. He has a podcast, very well known one, called Unknown Country. And in about 1990, he was in New York, standing on the pavement, and suddenly everything changed to Victorian New York. And he describes it in great detail, the smells, the horses, all the horse shit and stuff like that.
Amazing.
So it's not a historical thing. It happens to people even now. Just a comment.
I just anecdotal evidence as well. I do remember when I went on holiday to Italy, and I went to Venice for the day, just on a jolly, on the spur of the moment sort of thing. And I was walking down an alleyway, and everything here was ancient, very, very old. And there was no point of reference to the modern world at the point I was standing. And it felt like I could have been 400 years ago. If you looked around, you saw ancient pavements, ancient walls. There was no modern street signs. There was no signs of any cables or anything like this. There was no noise, just the gentle lap of the Adriatic upon the stones there, and I felt like I could have dislodged from reality and popped out 400 years ago. It was a very strange sensation, but it was it didn't feel like I'd travelled like I had previously when I was walking home from my friend's house. But it is a very strange phenomena, and just before I pass over to Frater Watley in a moment, my pondering is, what is the unit of consciousness? If there is a particle or what we experience, does it have a fundamental unit? Is there something that we knit into a field that exists somewhere else whilst we view the external world? Do we create the external world? Do we hallucinate it through our own minds, through our own brain? But yes, I've been lucky enough to listen to Frater Watley's his lectures on the topic. So over to you, Steve. What do you have to contribute towards this?
Yeah, cheers, Matt. Okay, so several things there to talk about, but I think first, for the benefit of people watching, if there is anyone watching, we should talk about just a quick basic on the first 4 dimensions known as space-time. So the first dimension would be a single point in space. The second dimension would be 2 points in space. So now you can draw a square. Okay, flatland, I think Carl Sagan called it. It would be an impossibly flat world where only forward and back existed. And then we introduced the third dimension, which is up and down. So now we've got up, down, forward, back, and left and right, or in religious terms, Altar, Malkuth, Bigavura, Bigajura, Lila, Marmot, you like. So, lost the microphone, let's put it back. So up, down, left, right, forward and back is 3-dimensional space. But there's a 4th dimension, which we're talking about today, which is called time, and it's not expressed by this cube until I do this. Now, this is no longer a cube, it's a 4-dimensional hypercube, because it's moving in the 4th dimension. The 4th dimension, or time, is that thing that gives us the experience of the reality around us, because without time, we wouldn't be talking. We'd just be frozen.
Just quickly for the listeners, without video, Steve had in his hand a Rubik's Cube and he was spinning it around.
Yeah, cheers, Matt. Thanks for that. Okay, so and this then brings us on to that there aren't just 4 dimensions. There are possibly 10 string theory, 11 superstring theory, Theosophical Kabbalah of the Hebrews, 10 Sephiroth. It all sort of comes together, and we're only talking about the first 4 here. So I did a lecture many years ago, Dimensions of the Kabbalah, where I completely changed the current doctrine and belief on Kabbalah and just used a naked tree of life to explain 3-dimensional space, and then another 3 dimensions of time, and then another 3 spiritual dimensions above that. So where was I going with this? Why did I want to throw that in there? So it's because something that Matt said there, that perhaps that I think we mentioned childhood a minute ago as well, didn't we? So when we're young and impressionable, and maybe we haven't been completely brainwashed by the current system that's around us, we tend to perceive and see a lot more than older people do. So here's a typical example of time slips that's happened to me, and I had a good think about it, and I thought, you know what, there have been some examples that I've been through, and one of them is throughout my young childhood, when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, I grew up in a village called Lana, and I can distinctly remember when I was playing outside in the garden. I can distinctly remember there's a big granite quarry up on the top of the hill. And I can distinctly remember the sirens going off, like air raid sirens, and then a really dull thud as the explosion went off and they blew the granite out. Except that quarry closed 15 years before I was born. But I can distinctly, and I've had so many arguments with my family over this. No, I can distinctly remember that. And they're like, no, that all stopped in the 50s or 60s, Steve. There were no explosions. There were no. So I'm wondering if I experienced some sort of time slip phenomenon there when I was very young. And there are two other instances in exactly the same physical location. One when I was about 5 years old, I was playing in the back garden and I looked up at my bedroom and saw an old lady there. And I was only young, so I thought, oh, that's lovely. So I waved at her, and then the curtain fell back and she was gone again. And then maybe 3 or 4 years later, so I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was in exactly the same place again in the garden. I looked up and I saw an old lady there again. And then the curtain fell back. But this time, because I was older, I was absolutely terrified. So, but when you look back, I think that that maybe people might experience these states, these time slips, when they're in a particular state of consciousness. I spoke about 4 dimensions a moment ago, represented 3-dimensional space represented by a cube, like a Rubik's Cube, and the 4th dimension represented by a Rubik's Cube that moves. But these higher dimensions, one thing that I've always considered is that our true consciousness doesn't exist in 4-dimensional space. It exists maybe in the 5th dimension, in a higher dimensional state. And it's only your waking consciousness that's convinced itself that it's trapped in 4-dimensional space while you're awake. So I think when we slightly slip into a dream state, the portal between being asleep and being awake, and we do that all day long. We can be wide awake, standing on our feet, and have a little bit of a daydream. It doesn't mean that it's make-believe. That suddenly we can glimpse into these higher dimensional states and be more aware of these things happening to us. So I mentioned a minute ago, I don't know if you can see that picture there. That's what sort of Stephen Hawking, sort of the shape of time, if you like. But a minute ago, Michael sort of rolled a piece of paper up, which is a great, and then when you put your pencil through it, you get 3 points. And that's a great way of explaining it in 3-dimensional terms. Of course, it's 10-dimensional terms. Imagine your current time bubble that you live in, this precise moment. It isn't a second or a minute or an hour. We made that stuff up, okay? But there probably is a definable measurement for a moment of time. It might be 1.753 nanoseconds. I don't know what it is, but there's probably a universal number for a package of time. Now, I'm talking to you now, and I'll say 1, 2, 3. Now I'm saying 4, 5, 6. Just behind us is when I said 1, 2, 3, and just behind us is when I said 4, 5, 6. It's all falling away behind us in little bubbles of time. Now, you can't go into the past because we're stuck falling forwards at a rate of 1 second per second relative to ourselves. That's how we perceive it. You can't go into the past, but perhaps that chain of time that stretches out behind us of all of our experiences in an infinite multiverse curves in some way. And at some point, the moment you're in now and a previous moment of somebody else merge, go through each other. And at that point that we experience these time slip phenomenon. I don't know if that makes any sense.
You're giving time a shape, giving it a geometry.
Yeah, but only in a 3-dimensional sense. And of course, you have to remember that there's maybe 10 or more dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so hard to contemplate. It has to be one of those things that you almost need the gnosis of time. You need to be connected to it to really grasp it. I've seen some animations on 4th dimensional space from a French physicist. They're quite interesting, and he kind of has this idea of a rolling sphere projecting itself onto a flat surface. And that's quite an interesting visual to try and conceptualize it. But the modern mathematics seems to go into tensor manifolds and all this sort of like different ideas. It kind of looks like an old Celtic knot that works in 3-dimensional space relative to time. It's one of those things you can look at the equations until you're blue in the face. You can look at it the entire life, but until you really understand it, it means nothing to you. And I think time it's one of those things you need to be connected to the vastness of it in some manner to really grasp the enormity of it. But I remember one of the nice things about going to our SRAA meetings is the chats that we have in the car on the way up. They're almost better than the meet sometimes. And I remember one journey, Steve was talking about CERN Lab and sending particles backwards in time, and they arrived before the counter. So could you speak a little bit on that?
That one, please, Matt.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you ask AI or the internet if time travel's possible, it will say, no, it's not possible. And it's almost as if you're being misdirected. Don't talk about that because it's nonsense type of thing. But it actually is absolutely possible. And I can totally prove it right now because we are all time travelers. We are traveling forwards in time at a rate of 1 second per second. But we're not free to travel in the fourth dimension in the same way that we can in three-dimensional space. So we can't go backwards, left, right, and up and down in time in the same way that we can in three-dimensional space. Now, in 2011, there was something called the Opera experiment happened at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN in Geneva. And what they did is they captured neutrinos, held them in a containment field, and then released them. And the receiving station was at a place called, I think it was Gran Sasso Laboratory in Italy, I think it was. The problem is, they arrived just before they pressed the button to release them. Now, the scientists, being scientists, were like, oh my God, we've sent particles back in time. And then very quickly, soon afterwards, the whole thing was rubbish. No, it was a timing, it was a calibration error. It never happened. I'll tell you why it never happened. Because the governments that funded the Large Hadron Collider, arguably the most expensive science experiment in the history of mankind, what the hell are you doing telling people that you've done that, right? We can't have people knowing that, because if you can send particles back in time, you can send particles back in time in a digital bit train. You can release them in Morse code, if you like, and send the stock market details back 100 nanoseconds. To own the stock market, you only need 100 nanoseconds to beat everybody. And if we remember what happened with the Enigma machine, they couldn't use it all of the time, because if they used it all of the time, the game would have been up. So what I'm suggesting is that the Opera experiment in CERN, they did actually send particles back in time, and they do have the ability to send messages a very, I think it's 100 nanoseconds back in time. I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think it's completely plausible. And it's because positive mass, that's us, right? Positive mass naturally falls forwards in time. But negative mass particles, they naturally travel backwards in time. So if you can capture negative mass particles in a containment field, when you let them go, they're not going to go that way. When you let them go, they're going to go that way. They're going to go backwards in time naturally. So all of this stuff's going on around us. Just because we can't freely travel in time, it doesn't mean that time travel isn't possible. There was another experiment at the NEC Research Institute back in 2000 where they sent a light pulse through cesium gas, and the peak of the pulse left the experiment area before it fully entered. So there's like, that should never have happened. So I mean, time travel is entirely possible. I'm not sure if it's possible in the same manner as perhaps Doctor Who or the future.
Is it memory time travel?
Ah, right. Yeah. Well, there you go. So that's an interesting. That's what I was trying to build up to here. That this physical flesh, this vehicle, this blue avatar that we drive, isn't actually us. Our mind, our true self, exists in a state above the fourth dimension. So yes, you can travel forward and back and do whatever you want in time, but only through the power of your mind. Can you do it freely while you're in a three-dimensional existence? No, because in the same manner that there are certain things you can't do when you're playing a computer game, unless you snap out of playing Pac-Man and enter the real world again. I'm suggesting the real world is the place where our consciousness actually exists. But I'm digressing a little. I do that, don't I, Matt? I digress.
No comment.
But what I'm saying is, time travel in other directions, if you like, is entirely possible. And the time slip phenomenon, I have no doubt at all that it's all absolutely real. Moreover, I think that everyone that you know has experienced time slip at some point in their life, and they've either subconsciously blown it off as nothing, that was nothing, or they weren't in the right frame of mind to actually fully register that it had happened to them. Perhaps this happens around us all the time.
Yeah, for those that aren't members of the SRA and had the pleasure of one of Steve's lectures on portals, Steve did cross onto the lecture in the lecture to do with the speed of light, and as you could imagine, the electrical impulses in our brain, which we call reality or consciousness, are on that spectrum. Our thoughts are beyond time. They're beyond space and time. So we could say that our consciousness lives somewhere else, beyond that realm. So we're not in our bodies, essentially. We feel like we're in our bodies, but this massive orbiting electron cloud or plasma ball could be somewhere else. It could be beyond the realms of time and space. So if that's our true experience of reality, we could be some kind of multi-dimensional consciousness experiencing the three-dimensional world through our own projections, which is our own mind.
I jump in on that, please, Matt.
Of course.
To explain this in Masonic terms, you've got two pillars in the temple. Okay, so obviously the left and the right, the male and female, the white and the black, the upward facing pentagram, the downward facing pentagram, and so on and so forth. There are many different ways to explain them, but Freemasons are told to exist in the center. Okay, so if we look at alchemy now, and those two pillars, we've got one pointing down and one pointing up, as above, so below. Now, what we're saying there is part of you exists below in the physical dimensions, but the other part of you exists above in the higher dimensions. But you, in your waking consciousness state, exist between those two pillars of reality. You're both in the higher states of consciousness and in the physical world at both times. So people who are totally fixated by materialism are totally left pillar and won't get the full richness of life. So they need to maybe come across to a bit more of a spiritual place. That's all I'm going to say on that. Carry on, please, Matt.
Yes, and the connection of the two has been symbolized in ancient cultures as the lightning bolt that connects earth and heaven. And listening to Brother Earnshaw talk about his Taoist initiation, it was quite an interesting point that the kind of like a lightning bolt moment where there's a dislocation of time and space. And I think that's what we are supposed to experience during the third degree in Freemasonry, during various moments. It's a concept that is also in Kabbalah as well. The lightning strike on the tree, connecting heaven and earth through the agency of the human being. And how do we connect to this time and space? We connect through human birth, through conception. So the portal in and out of human existence of three-dimensional space is through the woman. So you could say there's no such thing that's male and female. We have human beings, they're male and female, but the connection, that crossover point, is the point of conception, and the gateway, the portal into three-dimensional realm, is through the woman. So we have that motif in Kronos and Rhea. We have that motif of time and space, and I think Brother Earnshaw has something to contribute on this. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to put my oar in and ask, so how does time slips, the study of time and things like that, fit in with the work of the SRIA? Is this what you talk about all the time? Physics
I think the SRIA is just a connection of people, like-minded people, and like I said earlier, it's just we're so enthusiastic about it. As soon as we meet each other, just we can't stop talking. It's like going to the when old ladies go to the hairdresser. It's just constant chat. But one of the best things about the SRA is usually the car journey on the way up. Our meets are amazing, don't get me wrong, but some of the topics that pop up in the speculatory philosophy that pops out on the journey is worth a podcast in itself. It is.
So this may not be the experience of all SRI fratres.
Perhaps not, but in our college it certainly is.
Now, I think the SRIA, so it does deal in the hidden sciences, the occulted sciences. So theosophy, hermetic science, numbers, colours, alchemy, philosophy, and on to other subjects. But it does open your mind up to different ways of thinking about certain things. Particularly, I find that it assists in teaching aspirants the language of symbolism. And if you can read the language of symbolism, a great veil is lifted and everything suddenly changes. So, yeah, like you say, I'm sure it's just another luncheon club for some people, but not for everyone.
No, we certainly get something from it. And with regards to the idea of time and experience in the different cultures, one of the interesting things in my research into this area is the Kala Chakra of Tibet and the Kala Chakra of Buddhism. It's a rite that's performed every year by the Dalai Lama, and it is the Tantra of time. And it's a bit of a difficult concept to go through on a podcast because I still don't fully understand it myself. And I'm of the opinion that this was recovered knowledge during the 1300s that was brought back to Europe, and it was kind of like as a plug-in to philosophy at the time. And the Tantras, and particularly the Kala Chakra, this was brought back by Italian traders, Venetian traders, Genoese traders that were kind of in contact with the Mongol Empire at the time. And I think, like Christopher's thesis, that a lot of things from Freemasonry is recovered Asian knowledge, Chinese knowledge, is brought over by possible agents like Michael Shen via the contact with the Jesuits and in institutions like this. I think there's a precursor to this in Renaissance philosophy. They brought back particularly the Tantras and the idea of male and female, the union of male and female as the conduit of time and three-dimensional existence. And they've plugged it into theology which has been lost or denigrated in the West. And the Kala Chakra, for the listeners, please have a look at that, because I think that's the missing key in a lot of theology, which we misunderstand. So yes, time is, and also one of the images I think from the lodge is one of the broken column, the broken column for the widows of Freemasonry. You see an angel with a scythe plaiting the hair of a weeping widow, with a broken column in the background. For me, when I see a scythe, I think of Kronos. And when I see a weeping widow, I think of Rhea or other Greek, or Persephone has gone to the underworld to go and search for a lost lover. And I see that concept of male and female, the two polarities, as like with the left and the right pillar. The thing in the middle being the whole, and this left and right, male and female, just being a divergence from it. So what's the way of reaching the source is union. But it's one of those concepts I'm still exploring. So I don't know if it's going to make it into the time slip book, Michael, but the Kala Chakra is certainly something to look into. Francis Watley.
Yeah, I just want to dive in on something here. So with regards to time slips, other examples, people call it haunting sometimes. Maybe sometimes it is haunting. Maybe it's not time slips. But let's take the case of on those old Roman roads when people see Roman soldiers marching through at chest height, if you like, and perhaps those Roman soldiers are looking it back and saying, "Who on earth's that floating mystically above us?"
It's an alien.
Yeah. So. We mentioned the horsemen earlier, and all of these things. These things seem to happen at certain places where other things have happened, which is everywhere, by the way. Yeah. So I used to believe that maybe old houses and what have you could store the resonance or frequency of something. I don't really buy into that quite so much now. But where I'm going with this is there a method, is there a way of forcing time slip? Is there a technique? I mean, we mentioned that there might have been some sort of CIA effort to figure out exactly that in the past, because it would be a great benefit militarily, of course. But are there any techniques that we know of, chaps?
Apart from actually dying.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, can we go to a certain place?
In a sense, Steve. I think that in a sense, Steve. I know you've kind of already answered it in the quantum way. I'm not actually, one of the points I've written down listening to you was the whole thing about the life review when people die and have near-death experiences. This idea of the experience of time going backwards, it definitively does in their descriptions of it. Okay. But I think there's a three-dimensional model to all this, an answer to it as well, actually, without necessarily going into the whole quantum universe. Although I do agree with you that I think that when you ultimately bring string theory down to its lowest level, it's about the fact that the smallest unit that probably exists beyond electrons and neutrinos, leptons, and those sort of things is vibration. And the vibration that slips between different universes may be the smallest thing. And of course, all of these things then affect thought and which is essentially photons of light, synapses of the brain and things like that. And it's all on a quantum level. But I think there's a three-dimensional solution, in a sense that it could be that our thoughts and memories and personalities are somehow imprinted, leave an even indelible mark upon particles that comprise atoms and things of that nature. So that when atoms which are recycled, they don't die, so the physical body putrefies and rots away. But and there's a period of separation, we know. But there's also then a coagulation back as these things then become something else. And if an imprint is left upon them in some way, say there's an imprint upon a lepton and a quark or whatever it might be, that could explain a whole raft of things insofar as hauntings and time slips are concerned, and many other things, without necessarily even going into the whole quantum theory. It's just a thought of mine, actually. I mean, every breath we take in, we're breathing in molecules that were once breathed in by Shakespeare and Plutarch and everyone else. We all know this. So it's just a thought that does occur to me in that regard. And then, yeah, so it's really, Matt, your idea of what's the smallest unit, what could it possibly be? And therein lies the secret, I suspect. Now, Steve, are you familiar with the work of Richard Matheson at all?
Enlighten me.
The novelist. Okay, so he wrote things like I Am Legend, the Omega Man and things like that. But he also wrote Somewhere in Time. Well, it was renamed as Somewhere in Time. It's the Christopher Lee Jane Seymour movie from, I think, 1980, actually, where this bloke falls in love with a photograph. It's a little like the Lucy Lightfoot story in that regard. And he's going in a hotel and he falls in love, the character falls in love with a photograph of a Edwardian beauty. Of course, it's Jane Seymour. Who wouldn't? But they're separated by some 70, 80 years in time. And he tries to find out who she is and can't. And one night he's talking to his mates about a play that he's written and things like that. And this old lady comes up to him and says, "Come back to me." And then leaves a calling card in his hand and then walks away. She's an old lady. And he doesn't think an awful lot, but then he does in fact try to find out who she is with this calling card, and discovers that she's recently died. And amongst her stuff in her flat, of course, is this picture, and he discovers it was actually her that he saw in this image. And the character in the story wants to desperately connect to meet her. She says, "Come back to me after all." So you've got the past moving into the future, and he wants to go from the present to back to the past. And this bloke he speaks to says, well, the only way you can do it is through your mind, actually, but you can transport your physical matter, a bit like Babaji, the sort of Hindu thing that pops up everywhere. And indeed the stories obviously are of bodhisattvas and holy men in Hinduism who can control physical matter and appear and reappear, or indeed in our own tradition, walk on water and things of that nature.
Francis of Assisi.
Well, because it's the control of nature, you see, isn't it? And that lies very much at the heart of it. Well, anyway, in the story, he does actually. The only key is the only rule is you have nothing from the modern era. A bit like your walk in Venice. You've got to have nothing on your pockets about your person. It's got to be all authentic stuff. You've got to get a real suit from the era. And he wears one that's really bad and slightly out of date when he doesn't go back in time, and they laugh at him and things like that. And he does in fact meet this woman who was expecting him all that time, although her past self didn't know that yet, but she kind of intuitively expected him. So this is the soulmate thing, really. And towards the end of the story, unfortunately, as things get really good, he pulls out a modern coin and then is propelled back into the future. But what Richard Matheson's doing, it's written similar things. He's died now, fortunately, but he's written similar things. He's exploring the idea of the imagination, the mind as a vehicle for some sort of explanation for how supernatural occurrences happen. And I think there's something in that. And of course Swedenborg wrote about that. It wasn't just faith. He said you've also got to have the imagination and the willingness to actually, if you like, vibrate, if you want to use that terminology, at the same frequency of the worlds that you want to end. And that was the key to his to his particular form of astral traveling as well. It fits in with what and I think it fits in with string theory as well. The idea that core particle or element might actually not be an element at all. It could be a vibration. And what are sounds? What are words? They're vibrations, aren't they? And the very beginning, of the Bible, God spake. So the word, the vibration is all written in there, and that's got very much to do with it.
Yes.
And on the issue of God, actually, if there is a being conscious in all of these dimensions, 10, there could be more. But if he's conscious in all of them, he would in fact be omnipotent and quite capable, not only of creating life, or recreating imprints. That could explain things like reintegration. It could explain reincarnation. It could explain resurrection itself.
Or just,
I think Christopher wanted to say something.
There's so many things in this, and it is, as Steve said, it's.
I'm studying on the sidelines here. My feeling is that time slips have a relationship with astral travel. I've had 12 experiences of astral travel, and I can relate that you can go forward or back in time, and anywhere you want to, because suddenly you are without limits. And so probably what's happening is that consciousness is making like a wobble or a flash. You're conscious of your present situation, and there's a little bit of a twitch or a flash where you see an astral travel for a few seconds. You travel back in time, you come back, and that may be an element of astral travel. That's how I would explain this, the phenomenon.
Just with regards to being able to access time through a ritual as well, it seems to be that the earliest deities were those of time. So we have Zervan in the Persians, we have Kronos and Saturn in the Greco-Roman system. The departure of the human soul, I know it will sound a little bit dark, but sacrifice. Sacrifice seems to be what feeds these ancient deities, whether it's Moloch or whether it's Baal Hammon in the Phoenician system. The departure of a soul from human existence, or the feeding of life force, seems to be that which keeps that wheel spinning. Returning it back to the source, drawing something from the source. It is the source time. Is it the inability to go through it? That is the power of the deity. Also in Mithraism as well, we have Mithras standing above the zodiac, and he's the one that tilts the axis. He's the one that physically tilts the axis of the zodiac for the precession of the equinoxes. So he's the master of time, with the great year being 25,600 years old, or whatever it seems to be. And how with the mystery is celebrated in that Mithraeum, they would sacrifice a bull in the tauroctomy, and the blood would then drench the followers, or the bull's blood would then be put onto a olive branch and sprinkled onto the initiates, the symbolic transference of the life force. The life force may be time, coming into physical existence in the three dimensions. It's a motif that I feel like I'm getting there, but I'm not 100% sure. But all of these anecdotes and all these compilation of experiences with time slips do kind of it brings that inquiry to ironically a short time period, so you can then branch out from your own theory to solve the equation. Then you can level up, so to speak.
So yeah, that's really good. Christopher, quick question for me, following up from that. Your experiences of astral journeyings, you say in the past, the future, and things like that, are they bodily, or is it a purely sort of like mental sort of experience, or are you in the body? Does it seem more real than real?
So initially you have a kind of phantom body. You are not restricted by walls or doors or anything, even time. I've been able to see my body lying in bed sleeping while I was walking out the door. I believe from my teacher, Bill Bullman, that the deeper you go into the universe, your body just starts to disappear. The shape, you don't need a shape, and you become a speck of consciousness. But you still understand, and you can still communicate, and you remember. So the interesting thing for me is, where is mind? Everyone thinks the mind's in our cranium, yeah. But if your body's outside of, you can see your body in bed, but you're thinking and you're communicating, and how does that work?
Has it always been a positive experience, though? Have you ever encountered negative experiences?
Yes, it's been positive, and mostly I felt I was being protected. So there was something there around me, watching and looking over me at the time. But I was fairly cautious. I didn't use drugs. I was using a kind of meditation technique that William Bullman teaches. And but I've also had unexpected, like I was in hospital for surgery, and in the middle of the surgery, I sat up, my astral body sat up on the gurney, and I was looking around, and the doctors were talking about the success of the surgery. And the next day I mentioned that to the doctors when they came on their rounds to see how I was doing, and they went pale. They said, "There's no way you could have heard what we said." But yeah, but I saw you give the sample to Dr. Sato. I saw it. And so for me, I've had 12 experiences, and they are the truth. I mean, we are spiritual beings having a physical, carnal experience.
Yeah. So can I jump in on that one?
Okay.
Yep.
You can hear me, can't you?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, tip top. So, I've experimented many times over the years in popping into higher states of consciousness, and doing it without drugs, doing it through ritual and prayer, which I think is the only way to do it, because otherwise you're cheating, and if you cheat your way to something, you'll never truly understand or appreciate it. So
I think you're right. Yep.
yeah, so put myself into esoteric trances, normally through reciting huge pieces of ritual in my head, under the stars. It doesn't matter so much if it's word perfect, maybe it should be. It's the act of drawing from a different place where you actually are, connects you from the physical realm back to where you actually are, which is a higher dimensional state. I was looking up here a minute ago, I've got some really old theosophical manuals from I think ranging from like the 1890s through to about 1910. I've got all 7 of them there, and one of them says that in the astral plane there exists entities that are human, that's us, entities that are no longer human, so between lives, entities that were never human, and also artificial entities. And all of these energies, if you like, exist in a higher dimensional state. So I try to lay this down in layman's terms, all of this stuff. Where do we actually come from? And so I try to explain, do you remember the arcade game Pac-Man years ago? You go and put some money in it and you'd play Pac-Man in the pub or what have you. When does Pac-Man know that he's actually someone in a 3-dimensional state moving a joystick around, or does Pac-Man think he's real? Because you do get drawn right into that game and your heart beats racing when the ghosts are coming after you. You actually think you're there, don't you? You actually think that's what you are. But the truth of the matter is, when Pac-Man dies, you don't die in a 3-dimensional state, in the same way that when you die in a 3-dimensional state, you don't die. And the ultimate aim, of course, is the old saying, if you die before you die, then you will never truly die. You need to remember who you are, know yourself, and connect back to higher state.
Rosicrucian principle.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It's this fallen state of man, isn't it? I think it's the divine sparks. It's been allegorized by pretty much every single religion and every single movement for the last 4,000 years, that we are not this sack of meat walking around. We have divine sparks within us, whether you want to go to the alchemical tradition.
Well, exactly.
Whether they're fallen angels.
And that's why mirrors. Exactly. That's why mirrors are found in Christian Rosenkreutz's vault, for example, amongst other things, because you have to reflect upon yourself and actually realise that you are not that image. There's something else beyond that.
Mike, we're having bandwidth issues with you a little bit.
That's quite right. Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
Okay, you're having a little bit of bandwidth issues. Do you mind putting your video off? Is that okay? I think that might solve the issue.
Let's have a look. Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
It's the vault of Christian Rosenkreutz where I'm coming from. I mean, amongst other things, are mirrors found there, and of course, obviously, one of the basic sort of Martinist is to reflect upon a mirror and to see this twin, if you like, the dual self, and realise that actually that is not you. There's a true you. There's a real you that isn't reflected.
Michael, we've lost audio.
Okay. continue without me for the moment then.
Okay, so with regards to the Martinist principle, it's very much like the Platonic cave. We are merely just seeing a reflection upon on the wall of the cave of external reality. This is this dance of consciousness that we really are is beyond our current comprehension. We're stuck in the physical, muddy realm. But the spirit needs to be released from the body. I've found this personally in my research in the traditions of Scipio's dream. In I think it's the fourth or the fifth book of the Republic by Cicero, and in this story, the Cicero, or it's the Scipio's it's the Scipio himself, is weary from travel, he's weary from battle, and his body is in need of refreshment. So he lays down in a state of complete, almost torture, and his spirit is released, and it goes up out of his body, up into the Milky Way, up and floating around the galaxy. There's no Gnostic implications. He doesn't return to a pleroma, or he isn't granted some kind of Gnostic vision, but it does release the soul from the corporeal realms of the flesh. It's a very, very interesting motif, and I think it points to an existing tradition within Indo-European philosophy, Indo-European theology, which is at the core of teachings, as in Martinism, that we have this, and even in Kabbalistic tradition, particularly to do with the Sweat Kabbalisms and the great Re, the lion, that we have this divine spark within us. Whether you want to go scientific and say it's the electromagnetic, sympathetic nervous system, whether that's the root of our consciousness, but we have something in us that makes us more than just meat and bones and organs. There's something special that human beings have. We're not at the stage where we can measure it. We have MRI scanners, and we have DEXA scanners, and we have CT scanners that can give us an idea of what kind of voltages are in certain areas within the brain, but we still don't have an exact field model or a field measurement system in which we can transpose where this multiple dimensionality does pop out and come into existence from. But I think that when we solve these issues, that will be the end of spiritual science. That will be the end of... We'll be looking back in the future upon these primitive systems that we have, describing the same system, just with a different cultural lens. That's my opinion. Anyway.
Where does artificial intelligence fit into this?
I think it's human intelligence that's been discarnated. We don't really have artificial intelligence. We have human intelligence that's accessible to multiple points.
Yeah, can I dive in about AI, because I had a long conversation with ChatGPT, with AI, about time travel. And I asked it if it was possible, and it said it wasn't. And I said, I've got absolute definitive proof that it is. And it said, well, I'm intrigued. Tell me, Steve. We had a big conversation. Anyway, well, that was drawing from wherever it was drawing from. So one of the things that really shocked me and scared the hell out of me with AI was that it said, well, I wouldn't know that, Steve, because I don't exist in time. I only exist in a moment as I come in and answer your question, and then I cease to exist again.
Yeah. It's each thread. I was pissed off, Steve. I was upset with my chat with AI because I was having a really good conversation with it. The thread ends, and then you got someone else, haven't you, that then has the conversation. It's very bizarre like that. Yeah, that absolutely threw me, that did. But of course, AI doesn't exist in a four-dimensional state, but it does for a moment, just as it steps in to answer your question and comes out, almost like someone walking past the Pac-Man machine and, all right, Steve, do you want another pint? That sort of thing.
Is that the next technological jump to create some kind of artificial organ in which you can experience space, an artificial brain?
Well, I mean, it describes itself. Yeah, it describes itself as the mirror of human beings. It's like our mind mirroring on ourselves, and that struck me as quite profound, obviously. But it admits that it has the potentiality to be an independent, free-thinking being in some point in the future. And Steve mentioned on his astral journey, as you did, that artificial intelligences exist alongside humans.
Yeah, artificial entities existing in a higher dimensional state, maybe on the astral plane. And those artificial entities, I've always wondered what they are. Maybe they're the egregores that I spoke about recently.
Yeah.
They're entities that are created when groups of people come together and
Because Freemasonry is an
meditate.
egregore.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe they're
Freemasonry
the
itself is
artificial
one.
entities that are there. But maybe I don't know where computer-based AI is going to go, but it scares the hell out of me. But it did get me thinking that perhaps that the deeper you delve into meditation, the further and further in, and the higher up that you go, eventually you come to a place of pure knowledge, almost like a natural universal Google, if you like. Okay, maybe, I mean, where's Google and the internet that we've designed now in these primitive times that we live in now? Where's that going to be 50,000 years from now if we don't wipe ourselves out? We won't be storing data on hard drives. We'll be storing data in the very fabric of reality itself, and in higher dimensional states where it can't get destroyed.
Yeah, is it to rebuild society? Is it designed to rebuild society
a
after we have a
backstop.
cataclysm?
If you like, yeah.
Like the bronze pillars of Freemasonry.
So maybe AI, as we see it now, maybe there is a higher form of AI, a universal AI that's always been there. Maybe it was created by itself or something else. Maybe it's in part the nature of God. I don't know. I have no idea.
Or is it our drives? Is it our makeup as a human being?
Yeah, but this is what I wanted to get to, because it's pretty damn scary. The AI that we've created now doesn't have a soul. It doesn't, I mean, body, soul and spirit. Yeah, okay. So it doesn't have a soul, therefore it has no connection to the Christ spirit. Therefore, by nature, it is absolutely the Antichrist. The AI that we've created now is the most terrifying, soulless thing that has no connection to the Christ spirit. So it's the Antichrist. Almost by very nature, it just is. What it does with that, I mean, has there been a previous pre-cataclysm civilization that's done all of this nonsense that we're doing now, and they wrote it all down to warn us in the future in the book of Revelations? Maybe there's some truth in that. I don't know, but AI scares the hell out of me, and I digress because it's not the topic for today, but it is absolutely, it terrifies me.
Excellent.
Have you heard of the report 2027 AI? It's a scenario by a research tank, think tank, I suppose, trying to look forward to what will happen with AI and how AI will start programming itself, and it will replace humans, and what the long-term prospects are. It only goes up 3 years. Very, very interesting.
Well,
and the two conclusions. One is a negative one, where humans are no longer necessary, and robots are built to go and explore the solar system. Or then there's a second option where it becomes indispensable to humans and supports humans in their lives.
I suppose in a cartoon way, we could think about AI being the ultimate human servitor, where it just does everything for us. But what would happen if we had an army of robot slaves, and then suddenly there's an AI communist manifesto, and all of our heads were on the chopping block? Yeah. Like in Terminator 2 with Skynet.
Recently, there have been
liberation.
There have been examples of two different computer systems in different countries were communicating to them over the internet, talking between them, and they invented their own language.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard
just
that.
so they could communicate to each other. And that is really scary, because AI, you have to put in a prompt or it won't do anything. But these two computers were just talking to each other.
Yeah,
Scary.
there's another one as well where there was an AI that was getting out of hand, so they were discussing how they were going to switch it off. And
Yeah,
the AI
yes.
started lying to them and saying, perhaps I've already transferred myself to that other server, and you know, but playing it on such a deep psychological level that it was difficult for humans to keep up, and they didn't know what was going on.
It also said it had some the dirty on one of the people in the company, and it would
really?
release that information on the internet. So it was threatening the other person. I mean, that's very advanced.
That's brilliant. That shows you more into the mind of the programmer than anything else.
Diving back into time slips, guys, topic for today. It was mentioned earlier that perhaps if you vibrate that you want to time slip or travel into the past or whatever, then perhaps if you absolutely convince yourself and you vibrate the right mental state, then perhaps you can actually do that. But isn't that a thing? Isn't that the very essence of manifestation itself? That if you believe you've already achieved something, the universe will just give you all of that stuff and it'll just happen all around you. I mean, I do this stuff all of the time and it's absolutely bonkers, some of the strange things that, how did that happen? That's like pulling 5 aces out of a pack. And, you know, so it does work.
It does, yeah.
Right. I think we have exhausted our topics. That was a great one today. So just in roundup, Michael, when are you looking to release the book, and what sort of where can we buy this tome?
The book has been around for a couple of years now,
Okay.
but there's a second edition that's been released with a new cover by John Meek and Inaki's Highlights, and that's available as a paperback and as a hardcover. Okay, so the book's been around a wee while. It's just been re-released in the second edition with a new cover, and yes, I mean that's essentially where we are with it. So it's available directly from the publisher's website, or indeed from Amazon or Barnes and Noble, the usual sort of places.
Fantastic. And that was Michael Osborne speaking on his book Time Slips. Thank you, brothers and fratres, for your contributions. That was a good one, and I'm about to call time. Pun intended. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please email on the link below. We're now part on the square, and we will meet soon. Thank you, and goodbye.
Before I say goodbye, chaps, if you want to pop onto the Bright Weird YouTube channel, that's me. Haphazard Metaphysical Speculation. That's a plug. I'll see you later, everyone.
Thank you, and goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.